In this episode, we're going to focus on a part of cloud identity that can be incredibly powerful and also surprisingly fragile: identity federation. Federation is what allows one trusted identity system to vouch for a user or service so they can access cloud resources without creating separate local accounts everywhere. When federation is designed well, it simplifies access management, reduces password sprawl, and makes it easier to enforce consistent authentication policies. When federation is designed poorly, it creates a trust channel that attackers can abuse to impersonate users, escalate privileges, or reuse tokens in ways you did not expect. The cloud reality is that trust relationships are not simply on or off. They are shaped by rules, claims, conditions, and token life cycles, and small mistakes in those areas can open large doors. Hardening federation paths means tightening the trust boundaries so that only the right identities can use federation, only for the right purposes, and only for the right duration. Our goal is to understand what federation paths are at a high level, why they are targeted, what trust abuse looks like conceptually, and what defensive guardrails reduce token misuse without turning access into chaos. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A good beginner definition of federation is a relationship where a cloud service accepts identity proof issued by an external identity provider, rather than requiring the cloud service to authenticate the user directly. In practice, this means a user signs into a familiar identity system and then receives a token or assertion that the cloud service trusts. The cloud service uses that proof to decide who the user is and what they should be allowed to do. This design is attractive because it centralizes identity management and reduces the need for separate credentials in each cloud environment. It also enables single sign-on experiences, where users move between services without repeated logins. The risk, however, is that the cloud service is trusting the external identity proof, so the correctness of access decisions depends on the correctness of the trust relationship. If the trust relationship is too broad or poorly constrained, an attacker can exploit it to gain access without ever breaking into the cloud service directly. Trust abuse is the misuse of a trust relationship to gain access that was not intended. In the federation context, trust abuse often means presenting a token that is accepted as valid but represents a user, role, or permission level that the attacker should not have. This can happen if the identity provider issues tokens too easily, if tokens can be forged or replayed, or if the cloud service accepts tokens with weak validation. It can also happen if the mapping between identity attributes and cloud permissions is too permissive, so that a user can appear to belong to a privileged role through a misconfigured claim or group membership. Another path is when an attacker compromises an identity provider or the federation configuration itself, then uses the trust channel to mint powerful access into the cloud. For beginners, the key point is that federation is a bridge, and if the bridge is poorly guarded, attackers can cross it with stolen or misrepresented identity proof. Hardening is about controlling who can step onto the bridge and what they can do on the other side. Token misuse is closely tied to trust abuse because federation usually relies on tokens that represent identity and authorization context. A token is a portable piece of proof, and if it is stolen, copied, or reused beyond its intended context, it can become an attacker's shortcut into systems. Token misuse can include replaying a token from a different device, using a token after it should have expired, or using a token to access services beyond what was intended. In some cases, token misuse happens because tokens are issued with overly long lifetimes, or because the system cannot revoke them quickly when risk is detected. It can also happen when tokens include more permissions than necessary, or when they can be exchanged for other tokens with broader scope. The important cloud reality is that many attacks no longer focus only on passwords. They focus on tokens and sessions because tokens represent live access. Hardening federation paths, therefore, include strengthening how tokens are issued, scoped, validated, and revoked. One of the most important hardening ideas is narrowing the scope of trust, because broad trust is convenient but dangerous. Scope can mean which identity providers are trusted, which users or groups within those providers are allowed to federate, and which cloud roles they can assume. A secure design avoids trusting an entire external directory for all purposes and instead trusts specific identities or groups for specific access needs. It also avoids granting broad administrative roles through federation by default, because that turns a compromise of the identity provider into an immediate cloud takeover. Narrowing trust also means limiting the cloud resources and actions that federated identities can access, especially for high-risk services like identity administration and key management. The exam tends to reward this logic because it reflects least privilege applied to trust relationships, not only to individual permissions. Trust should be explicit, narrow, and defensible, not assumed. Strong authentication is another core part of hardening federation, because the identity provider's authentication strength becomes the cloud's authentication strength. If the identity provider allows weak authentication methods, attackers can compromise users there and then use federation to access cloud resources without needing a second compromise. A hardened approach ensures that federated access requires strong authentication, and that sensitive cloud access requires stronger verification than routine application access. Context-based controls also matter, such as requiring additional verification for unusual sign-ins or blocking access from risky contexts. The key is to treat federation as an extension of the identity provider, not as a separate system with separate rules. If you want cloud administrative access to be strongly protected, you must ensure the identity provider enforces strong protection before issuing the tokens used for that access. Otherwise, you have simply moved the weak point to a different place. Attribute and claim mapping is a common source of federation weakness, and hardening here is about being precise about what identity information the cloud service will accept and how it translates into permissions. Federated tokens often carry claims, which are statements about the user, such as group membership, role, or other attributes. If the cloud service uses those claims to grant permissions, then any mistake in claim issuance or interpretation can become a privilege escalation path. For example, if a token claim that indicates an admin role can be set too easily, or if group names overlap in confusing ways, a user might be treated as privileged without proper approval. Hardening means limiting which claims are trusted, validating them carefully, and mapping them to permissions in a way that avoids accidental broad grants. It also means ensuring that group membership changes and role assignments are governed and reviewed, because group membership becomes a security boundary. Beginners often underestimate how easy it is for a small naming mistake or a default mapping to create wide access. Token lifetime and refresh behavior are central to preventing token misuse, because time is one of the simplest and strongest safety boundaries. Short-lived tokens reduce the value of theft because a stolen token becomes useless quickly, and they reduce the window for replay attacks. However, short lifetimes must be balanced with operational needs, because users cannot be forced to re-authenticate constantly in ways that disrupt work. Hardening focuses on choosing lifetimes appropriate to sensitivity, requiring re-authentication for high-risk actions, and controlling refresh so that sessions cannot be kept alive indefinitely without fresh verification. Another key aspect is revocation, meaning the ability to invalidate tokens or sessions quickly when you suspect compromise. If the system cannot revoke access promptly, then incident response becomes slower and risk increases. The exam often emphasizes this lifecycle thinking because it shows you understand access as a time-bound state rather than a static login event. Audience and scope restrictions are another important concept for hardening, because tokens should be usable only for the specific services and purposes they were issued for. If a token can be accepted by multiple services or exchanged too broadly, attackers have more opportunities to misuse it. A hardened federation path ensures that tokens are issued for the intended audience and that services validate that they are the correct audience before accepting them. It also ensures that tokens have scoped permissions, meaning they grant only the access needed for the target service, not a general set of permissions that could be applied elsewhere. This reduces the risk that a stolen token for a low-risk application can be reused to access a higher-risk cloud console. Beginners sometimes assume that a token is just proof of identity, but in modern systems it often carries authorization context too. Hardening is about making that context as specific and constrained as possible. Monitoring and auditability are also required because trust abuse often looks like legitimate access unless you watch for subtle anomalies. Federated access should produce clear records of who authenticated, which identity provider was used, what roles were assumed, and what actions were taken. It should also record administrative changes to the federation configuration itself, because attackers may try to modify trust settings to make abuse easier. Hardening includes treating federation configuration as high sensitivity, requiring careful change control and reviewing changes regularly. It also includes detecting unusual federation patterns, such as new role assumptions, sign-ins from unusual locations, or sudden bursts of token issuance. The goal is not to create noise, but to ensure you can trace and investigate suspicious use of trust channels. If you cannot see federation activity clearly, you cannot confidently defend it. When you put all these ideas together, hardening identity federation paths is about treating trust as a security boundary and tokens as high-value access artifacts. You narrow the scope of trust so that only intended identities can federate and only for intended roles and resources. You ensure strong authentication at the identity provider because it directly affects cloud access strength. You handle attribute mapping carefully to prevent accidental privilege escalation through claims and group membership. You manage token lifetimes, refresh, and revocation so stolen tokens lose value quickly and compromised sessions can be shut down. You constrain tokens to intended audiences and scopes so they cannot be reused across services in unexpected ways. Finally, you monitor federation activity and protect federation configuration with strong governance because the trust relationship itself is a prime target. On an exam, this approach helps you reason about scenarios where federation is convenient but risky, and it guides you toward answers that restrict, validate, and time-bound trust rather than assuming it is safe. In real cloud environments, it reduces the chances that a single identity compromise turns into broad cloud compromise through an overly trusting bridge.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.